Just tell the truth, Johnny, and you won't get punished. How many times have we heard that? Just tell the truth, little Johnny, and you won't get punished. We teach that telling the truth is the gateway to fairness, to freedom, to equality. The truth shall set you free. Well, if that's so, I have a hard question for us. Why are we so dishonest about how we teach American history? This started for me in the 3rd grade at Mady Ives Elementary in Florida. An 8-year-old boy, Kelsey Storr, attempted to integrate our all-white elementary school. And the parents at our school did what parents throughout the South and sometimes in the North did. They went on strike. They refused to send their children to a school that would be integrated. For 2 weeks, Kelsey, I, and one other student sat in a sweltering cafeteria, left to ponder what was going on, to try to make sense of this, to begin to tell the story. The civil rights movement began for me then, but as are more importantly, a lifelong interest in how stories are told and who owns history. I'm going to start by giving you 3 names: Claudette Colvin, Sarah Collins Rudolph, and Fannie Lou Hamer. If you don't know their stories, or you think you know their stories, you're going to know a lot more in about 4 minutes. But let's start with how we teach the civil rights movement now. It starts with a seamstress. Her name is Rosa Parks. She rides a bus in Montgomery, Alabama every day back and forth, working for a white family. And one day in 1955, she can't take some of the abuse anymore, tired, weary. She's asked to get up and move to the back of the bus for a white man, and she won't budge. She's arrested, and the movement begins. Rosa sat so that Martin could march, so that we could fly. That's how it's taught. Up the road in Birmingham, at the 16th Street Baptist Church on a crisp Sunday morning, right before children's services, a bomb tears through the basement. It kills 4 little girls: 14-year-old Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wellesley, Carol Robertson, 11-year-old Denise McNair. The bomb shocks the country, catapults us toward civil rights legislation, the Act of 1964, a step toward freedom. Nothing I've said is untrue, certainly not a lie. But how many know to not tell the whole truth, to distort the facts, to leave out significant portions, Johnny, is to manipulate? And it all adds up to a big lie. The image of Mrs. Parks over the years is enlarged and shrunken depending on the needs of the storyteller. She is imbued with incredible superhuman nobility. She looms larger than us. At the same time, her physical form is shrunken on that bus. She gets smaller and smaller every year, as if civil rights happened to her, vulnerable, guileless, innocent, tired. Let's tell the truth about Miss Parks. By the time she's arrested in 1955, she has 25 years of civil rights activism under her belt. She's, in fact, a freedom fighter. She is a civil rights battle soldier. She and her husband have traveled the South investigating some of the most horrific crimes against black people: lynchings, murder, rape, the burning of churches. She raises money for the defense of the Scottsboro Boys. In 1931, she's dispatched to Abbeville, Alabama, to investigate an incredible crime, the rape of Recy Taylor. Mrs. Taylor is a young mother walking home from church who is pulled off the side of the road and gang raped by 6 white men. Mrs. Parks and Mrs. Taylor bring information about the crime to the authorities in Abbeville, who, of course, do nothing. Mrs. Parks is elected secretary of the NAACP for 12 years. She is trained in disobedience at the Highlander Center in Tennessee. Vulnerable, guileless, innocent, shrunken? Hardly. Mrs. Parks is a freedom fighter. But we don't teach that. By making her and Dr. King and Coretta Scott King and Bobby Kennedy and so many others of the era, Julian Bond, larger than life, imbued with superhuman qualities of courage and nobility, grace, we're communicating to all of us, you and me who don't normally walk around thinking we're superhuman, that we're not capable of the kind of change that they were. This is a devastating lesson for children, that you are not capable of that kind of change. But that's how we teach history. History is the framing of facts to suit the purpose of the storyteller. The African proverb is, until lions tell their story, history will always favor the hunters. Let's go back to some of those lions that I mentioned. Claudette Colvin. 9 months before Mrs. Parks' arrest on that bus line, Claudette Colvin is arrested for the same offense, refusing to abide by the Jim Crow color line. The boycott and march had already been planned by the Montgomery Improvement Association, run by women. Everything was ready to go, but the attorneys, men, African American, who would later represent Mrs. Parks, declined to go forward with Ms. Colvin's case. Why? She was 15. She was pregnant. She was not married. There were 3 other women arrested that year: Susie McDonald, Aurelia Browder, Mary Louise Smith. But the march was put on hold. What else do we know? Up the road, back at that 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, we know that 4 Klansmen put 15 sticks of dynamite in that church vestibule on the steps and killed those little girls. Here's what we don't teach. Exactly 1 week before the bombing, Governor George Wallace of Alabama told the New York Times that in order to stop the racial integration in this state, which he opposed, we would need a few high-class funerals. This is the governor of the state, knowing full well that his leadership and his words was inciting the very violence going on. What else don't we teach? There was another young girl that morning, Sarah Collins. She's 12. She wasn't killed. She's hit with 21 shards of glass, blinded in one eye, spends 2 months in a hospital to contemplate the death of her sister and friends. Mrs. Collins, now Mrs. Rudolph, is alive today. She lives in Birmingham, Alabama. She's 66, and she's a not rare American who is a victim of state-involved terrorism. She lives today. There has been no apology from the state of Alabama. There has been no compensation. She said on the 50th anniversary of the bombing, reflected on what it felt like to still feel dead on the inside. No one has ever come to me and cared for me. They don't do much for the living, she said. I tell you, the dead get theirs. It actually gets worse. There's a state across the line from Alabama called Mississippi, a state I lived in as a young man. A state so invested in opposing racial integration, it created a state agency, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, to stop integration, to spy on, intimidate, and infiltrate civil rights workers. There's a woman in Mississippi named Fannie Lou Hamer. She's raised on the Marlowe Plantation as a sharecropper in Ruleville, Mississippi. She's the youngest of 20 children. As an adult in 1962, Miss Hamer goes to Indianola, Mississippi to try to register to vote, which is against the law. Returns back to the plantation, and she's kicked off of it. She gathers with other civil rights activists and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, forms the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to try to bust open the party in Mississippi to African Americans. She's arrested in Winona, Mississippi for that, taken to the jail. Her dress is hiked up, and she is beaten severely by sheriff's deputies, state actors, spends a month in the hospital. Many of you know where this story goes. Mrs. Hamer is heavily responsible for a classic showdown the 1964 Democratic Convention. She testifies to the Platform Committee. Against the wishes of President Lyndon Johnson, they agree ultimately to open up the Democratic Party to African-American voters in the South, which leads to black elected officials, which ultimately leads to President Barack Obama. Mrs. Hamer is an American revolutionary hero. Mrs. Hamer could not read and Mrs. Hamer could not write. She stopped school on the plantation owned by Mr. Marlowe in the 6th grade. But her work brought us closer to freedom than many of the founding fathers that we all know so well. Here's the difference. There is no county in this country named for Mrs. Hamer. There is no bridge. There is no tunnel. There is no airport. There is no highway. There is no serious curriculum in any public school devoted to her courage. There is this. It's an elegant statue in front of her childhood home in Ruleville, not brought to you by the state of Mississippi or the federal government. It's sponsored largely by AT&T. By not teaching the truth about Mrs. Parks and her ferocity, by not teaching the truth about Claudette Colvin and the so many like her who were courageous but anonymous, we do ourselves an enormous disservice. By not teaching about the thousands of Americans who, in the face of adversity, exercised courage, put their children into schools to integrate them or registered to vote, stood up when they were told to sit down, sat down when they were told to stand up. We rob ourselves and our children of the truth about how change is made. We rob our children of the ability to make change now, to fight the fights that they feel they have in front of them, whether it's criminal justice reform or mass incarceration or access to voting, left, right, or center, to empower people with the truth about our history, strategy, and tactics, and how ordinary people can make change is fantastic. It's also threatening to people who don't want change. We started the March on Washington Civil Rights Film Festival to be a national platform to give people the opportunity to tell stories more accurately about the American history. Through the power of film and artistry and scholarship, people tell first-person narrative as truthfully as they can. The story's not told, corrections of the story mistold. By teaching these stories, we give our young people the tools they need to actually gather and make the change that we say that we want. I'll leave you with the following. In what movement will you be a battle soldier, maybe later remembered as iconic? Which story would you like to learn more accurately and teach your children truthfully so that they can be set free? Which of you is Claudette Colvin, anonymous, impetuous, moving us forward? Which of you is Sarah Collins Rudolph, angry, passionate, still fighting for justice? Which of you is Fannie Lou Hamer, brilliant, strategic, with a vision far beyond the hard-scrabble land she was forced to work? Each of us has the power to make the change we say we need. Each of us. Each of us. Thank you so much.